Look around you right now. Over 90% of the anxiety, conflict, hesitation, and self-sabotage wrecking your life is not being caused by external events. It is being systematically generated inside your own mind by invisible, hardwired behavioral traps. Most people go through life convinced that their biggest struggles stem from difficult people, financial stress, lack of luck, or unfair circumstances. They spend decades treating external symptoms, trying to change other people's minds, arguing over petty conflicts, or waiting for the right time to take action. That is an absolute lie. In behavioral science, we know that human beings don't react to reality. They react to their internal distorted interpretation of reality. Your brain relies on automated neurological shortcuts, sub-perceptual stress loops, and social compliance behaviors that keep you trapped in a perpetual state of friction. When you don't understand the mechanics behind your own behavioral baseline, you are essentially driving a high-performance engine with no steering wheel. You become a passive participant in your own life, constantly hijacked by emotional triggers, seeking validation from people who don't matter, and burning valuable cognitive capital on problems that don't actually exist. If you turn away right now, you will continue running the exact same corrupted software. You will keep walking into the same social traps, making the same emotional miscalculations, and letting outside noise dictate your focus, status, and peace of mind. Stay with me for the next few minutes. I'm going to break down the exact micro-behavioral shift and psychological reset required to fix 93% of your daily problems in real time, giving you complete sovereignty over your mind, your emotions, and your life. Human beings like to believe they are logical creatures navigating an objective world. In reality, your central nervous system is constantly filtering sensory input through a complex web of past conditioning, primal insecurity, and automated threat detection mechanisms. When you encounter a challenge, a provocation, or a sudden setback, your conscious mind doesn't evaluate the event objectively. It instantly triggers a cascade of sub-perceptual stress signals, causing your breathing to shallow, your blink rate to spike, and your posture to contract. You then react to that internal stress spike rather than the actual event itself. 93% of the problems you face on a daily basis are completely manufactured by this automated internal feedback loop. Once you learn to intercept these sub-perceptual traps and master your baseline, the vast majority of life's friction simply ceases to exist. Here are the operational rules to recalibrate your mind and conquer that friction. First, when something goes wrong, the weak mind immediately projects narrative. Why is this happening to me? How could they do that? This narrative creates instant cognitive fatigue and emotional chaos. To regain control, you must execute raw behavioral observation. Strip away the emotional adjectives and look strictly at objective facts. If someone raises their voice, do not register an attack that requires a defense. Register a high-pitched audio frequency paired with an elevated vocal cadence. By treating external events as neutral environmental data points rather than personal affronts, you bypass the emotional filters of the mammalian brain. You keep your prefrontal cortex fully online, allowing you to execute clean, decisive solutions while everyone else is unraveling emotionally. Second, notice how you move when you feel uncertain or threatened. Your body naturally contracts, your movements speed up, and you leak nervous energy through erratic micro-adjustments. This nonverbal weakness invites pushback, boundary violations, and disrespect from your environment. To fix your external interactions, anchor your physical baseline. Occupy space deliberately, drop your shoulders away from your ears, and slow your breathing down into your abdomen. When your body maintains absolute physical stillness, and low-frequency breathing, your nervous system sends a powerful biological signal back to your brain, lowering cortisol and boosting cognitive control. You project unshakable authority, compelling those around you to default to your frame without you ever having to demand it. Third, when someone tries to bait you into an argument, drop a subtle insult, or challenge your status, their objective is simple. They want to extract an emotional reaction. If you respond with anger or rush to explain yourself, you validate their attempt and surrender your internal stability. Deploy tactical neutrality. When hit with a provocation, freeze your facial mechanics entirely. Maintain a steady, unblinking ocular focus. Pause for 3 full seconds and offer a completely neutral, low-energy response. When you refuse to return the emotional payload, the aggressor's hostility loses momentum. The tension they created reflects directly back onto their own nervous system, leaving them feeling exposed and disarmed, while your frame remains completely intact. Fourth, your daily focus is a finite biological asset. Think of it as a limited budget of mental energy. Every time you scroll mindlessly, engage in petty drama, or obsess over things outside your direct sphere of control, you burn precious cognitive currency. High authority individuals guard their attention like a vault. They recognize that outrage, gossip, and cheap digital validation are designed to hijack human focus and keep them operating in a perpetual state of mental brain fog. Audit where your attention goes every single hour. Cut off low-value social noise and redirect that saved bandwidth directly toward high-value execution, personal growth, and strategic mastery. Fifth, the instinct to make excuses or justify your choices is an explicit sign of an insecure frame. High-authority individuals operate from an implicit baseline of non-negotiable certainty. Their choices do not require social permission to exist. Stop offering verbose justifications for your decisions. State your terms clearly, objectively, and once, then stop talking. When you eliminate defensive explanations, you eliminate 90% of the social friction in your life. You stop placing yourself on trial, hold your position with quiet composure, and let your silence demonstrate that your reality requires no external validation. Shifting from an automated emotional reaction to raw, unvarnished observation is the foundational mechanism for dismantling the internal matrix of self-generated fiction. The vast majority of human suffering and daily conflict does not stem from objective physical reality. It is systematically manufactured by the narrative filters of the mind. When an external event occurs, whether a sudden professional setback, a sharp criticism, or an unexpected delay, the untrained central nervous system does not process the event as neutral data. Instead, it instantly passes the sensory input through a dense web of past conditioning, ego preservation, and primal threat detection mechanics. This automated processing loop immediately attaches emotional adjectives, personal grievances, and catastrophe narratives to the event, transforming a simple, manageable fact into an overwhelming psychological crisis that hijack your baseline stability. To interrupt this destructive neurological cascade, you must learn to execute strict, real-time behavioral observation. Raw observation requires you to strip away every layer of subjective interpretation, emotional projection, and personal narrative, reducing the external event down to its bare, undeniable facts. If an individual speaks to you in a harsh or elevated tone, the reactive mind instantly registers a personal attack, triggering an automated spike in heart rate, defensive posture, and anger. Raw observation, by contrast, intercepts this response before it takes root. You do not register an insult or a threat. You simply observe an audio frequency elevated by a specific number of decibels, accompanied by specific facial muscle contractions. By deliberately describing the scenario to yourself using strictly objective, non-emotional terms, you deny the primitive limbic system the emotional fuel it requires to initiate a fight or flight response. This conscious shift in processing fundamentally alters your neurochemistry and preserves your cognitive capacity. When you view your environment through the lens of raw observation, your prefrontal cortex remains fully online, calm, and analytical. You cease to be a passive victim at the mercy of environmental triggers, transforming into an objective behavioral scientist analyzing real-time data. Instead of wasting precious mental bandwidth asking why something is happening to you or indulging in feelings of offense, your brain immediately redirects its processing power toward logical problem-solving and strategic execution. You begin to see challenges not as personal affronts designed to ruin your day, but as neutral, structural variables within your environment that simply require a calm, calculated adjustment. Establishing the internal authority baseline through nonverbal physical mechanics is the primary mechanism for eliminating social friction, boundary violations, and self-doubt before they manifest in your reality. Human beings are biological scanning organisms, perpetually evaluating the nonverbal cues of those around them to determine social hierarchy, status, and internal security. Long before you open your mouth to state a position or enforce a boundary, the nervous systems of everyone in the room have already processed your micro-behaviors, your respiratory rate, posture, facial stillness, and spatial footprint. When you operate from an unstable internal baseline, your body leaks subtle signals of submission. Your movements become hurried, your breathing turns shallow and rapid, your blink rate spikes, and your muscles maintain chronic microtension. These subtle, nonverbal leaks act as an open invitation for others to test your limits, push past your boundaries, and challenge your authority. To eradicate this friction, you must systematically construct an unshakable physical baseline that projects calm, immovable authority. This begins by anchoring your physical presence and expanding your territorial footprint. When standing or sitting, you eliminate all forms of nervous fidgeting, rapid micro-adjustments, and self-soothing behaviors such as touching your face or adjusting your clothing. You pull your shoulders back and down, open your chest, and allow your hands to rest completely still in open, relaxed positions. Crucially, you consciously override the biological impulse to shallow breathe into your upper chest when under social pressure, forcing your respiration down into deep, low abdominal cycles. This physical stillness is not an act of aggressive posturing or intimidation. It is the physical manifestation of complete internal security, signaling to the room that your central nervous system is entirely unbothered by ambient stress. De-escalating emotional conflict and disarming volatile social situations requires the deliberate deployment of tactical neutrality to starve an opponent's aggression of the reaction it requires to survive. In human behavioral dynamics, every emotional attack, aggressive outburst, or manipulative baiting tactic is an energetic transaction designed with a singular objective: to hijack your central nervous system, pull you out of your baseline, and force you to match the high friction frequency of the provoker. The individual initiating the conflict relies entirely on your emotional return, anger, panic, defensive justification, or verbal pushback to validate their maneuver, generate momentum, and establish control over the interaction. When hit with volatility, the default human response is to react in kind, escalating the friction and feeding directly into a destructive feedback loop that drains your energy and destroys your authority. To execute tactical neutrality, you must intercept this automated escalation loop by systematically denying the aggressor their expected emotional payload. The instant a provocation lands, your facial mechanics must completely freeze into absolute stone-like neutrality, eliminating every micro-expression of annoyance, shock, or defensiveness. You do not scowl, smirk, or roll your eyes, as these minor nonverbal leaks reveal emotional investment and provide the aggressor with something concrete to react to. Instead, you hold a steady, unblinking gaze anchored directly on their eyes, allowing a heavy, deliberate pause of 3 to 5 seconds to hang in the air before you acknowledge their statement. In those crucial seconds of complete stillness, you offer no facial feedback, no sudden movements, and no change in your breathing rate, effectively treating their high-stress outburst as an irrelevant environmental noise rather than a meaningful challenge. When you do choose to speak, following the tactical pause, your vocal delivery must be dropped into a low, flat, and completely unhurried cadence that contrasts sharply with their elevated energy. You deliver short, neutral responses that neither accept their frame nor offer a defensive counter-argument, using flat statements that acknowledge the sound of their words without validating the emotion behind them. This complete refusal to match their emotional energy creates an immediate, severe breakdown in the aggressor's momentum. Because their attack relied on drawing you into a fight to build force, encountering an unyielding wall of cold neutrality causes their projected hostility to collapse back onto their own nervous system. The unspent aggressive energy transforms into a sudden spike of self-consciousness, social anxiety, and internal awkwardness, leaving them stranded in the void of your silence. Reclaiming and protecting your finite cognitive capital through radical attention sovereignty is the fundamental mechanism for eradicating brain fog, decision fatigue, and chronic mental exhaustion. In modern society, human attention has become the most valuable, heavily targeted commodity on Earth. Every digital interface, media ecosystem, social algorithm, and low-value interpersonal conflict is engineered with precise psychological triggers designed to hijack your dopamine pathways, pull you out of your baseline, and fragment your focus. Most people navigate life in a state of perpetual cognitive surrender, freely handing over their limited daily store of mental bandwidth to ambient noise, manufactured outrage, cheap notifications, and trivial social drama. This continuous hemorrhaging of attention leaves the central nervous system operating in a state of chronic, low-grade stress, draining the mental reserves required for high-level strategic execution, personal mastery, and deep, focused work. To establish true attention sovereignty, you must treat your cognitive bandwidth not as an infinite resource to be mindlessly distributed, but as a strictly guarded, high-value asset. This requires an immediate, ruthless audit of every channel through which information enters your conscious mind. You begin by systematically cutting off low-yield digital inputs that exploit your brain's evolutionary desire for novel stimuli, disabling non-essential notifications, eliminating mindless scrolling habits, and insulating your daily routine from the endless stream of outrage-driven media designed to trigger reactionary emotional loops. Simultaneously, you erect impenetrable psychological boundaries against low-value interpersonal drama, gossip, and the opinions of individuals who hold zero relevance to your long-term operational goals. You recognize that every second spent obsessing over external events outside your direct sphere of influence is a direct tax on your mental performance and a sacrifice of your personal sovereignty. The systematic reclamation of your attention triggers a profound restoration of your cognitive capacity and internal clarity. When you stop feeding your brain a continuous stream of hyper-stimulating, fragmented noise, your central nervous system shifts out of a reactive, hyper-vigilant posture and drops into a calm, focused state of operational readiness. Your dopamine baseline stabilizes, clearing away the persistent brain fog that plagues most modern individuals and replacing it with sharp, sustained mental acuity. Tasks that once felt mentally exhausting, such as solving complex problems, holding high-level strategic focus, or making critical decisions under pressure, become fluid and effortless because your cognitive reserves are no longer being continuously depleted by low-value distractions. You regain the rare ability to concentrate deeply, think critically, and move toward your goals with single-minded, uninterrupted momentum. By mastering radical attention sovereignty, you insulate your mind from the pervasive psychological manipulation engineered to keep the masses reactive, distracted, and weak. You step out of the chaotic, noisy matrix that consumes the energy of average individuals, operating instead with a level of clarity, purpose, and mental efficiency that sets you miles apart from your environment. While those around you burn their precious daily currency chasing cheap validation, engaging in petty conflicts, and reacting to carefully crafted digital bait, your focus remains entirely anchored on high-value execution and personal growth. You take absolute, uncompromising control over what is allowed to enter your mind, ensuring that your cognitive capital is invested strictly in building your sovereign frame and securing total dominance over your life. Eradicating defensive explanations and adopting decisive operational accountability is the definitive mechanism for building unshakable behavioral resilience and securing absolute personal sovereignty. The human instinct to rationalize, offer excuses, or present verbose justifications for one's choices is an explicit, nonverbal admission of an insecure frame. When an individual feels compelled to over-explain their decisions, state their motives repeatedly, or seek external validation for their actions, they are unconsciously placing themselves on trial before their environment. This defensive posture announces to the room that your authority is conditional, that your choices require social permission to exist, and that your internal baseline is easily shaken by the potential judgment of others. Low-authority individuals routinely trap themselves in endless cycles of social friction simply because they refuse to stand by their actions in quiet, unyielding silence. To break free from this submissive pattern, you must cultivate the discipline of concise, non-defensive communication paired with total ownership of your outcomes. When you make a decision, set a boundary, or execute an action, you state your position once, clearly, objectively, and without emotional fluff, and then immediately stop talking. You eliminate the impulse to soften the blow with excessive polite hedging, lengthy backstories, or defensive rationalizations designed to appease the other party. If a decision yields a negative result or an operational error occurs, you do not shift blame onto external circumstances, bad luck, or the actions of others. Instead, you claim total, uncompromising accountability for the outcome, acknowledging the fact without emotional drama, and shifting your focus immediately toward corrective action. By taking absolute ownership of both your successes and your failures, you strip outside observers of any potential leverage they could use against you. This fundamental shift in how you handle responsibility and frame your choices transforms your central nervous system from a reactive state to one of absolute self-contained authority. When you refuse to engage in defensive explanations, you eliminate over 90% of the petty social negotiations and power struggles that drain the average person's energy. Your silence following a clear statement communicates a profound level of internal certainty, signaling to others that your frame is solid and non-negotiable. Surrounding individuals quickly realize that attempting to interrogate, guilt-trip, or push back against your decisions will yield zero defensive friction or emotional leverage. Consequently, they cease testing your boundaries, recognizing that your actions are anchored in an unshakable baseline of personal conviction that does not require their approval or understanding.